it's Yay for Yarn, and today I'm going to show you how to make a cabled scarf on your Addi Express Pro knitting machine. So let's get started. So here I have my Addi Pro knitting machine. You can also do this on the Addi King, but you would need to make a skinnier flat panel than what the Addi King makes. So you'll just make a panel on less needles than the entire machine, all the needles on the whole machine. So basically, to make a cable, what we're doing here is making a flat panel, and we're making intentional holes every 10 rows. And so we have one panel that starts with 10 rows, make a hole, 10 rows, make a hole, 10 rows, make a hole, and then you end with 10 rows when you get to the other end. And then we have another panel that starts with 5 rows. You make a hole, 10 rows, make a hole, 10 rows, make a hole, 10 rows, make a hole, until you get to the end, and then you have 5 rows at the end, so that the holes are offset from the other panel. Now, for my cabled scarf, I'm making 2 cables and sewing them together lengthwise, but we're going to be threading the panels through these holes, you know, reaching down, threading the opposite one through the hole that is next. So I already have, since I'm making 2 cables, I already have 2 panels that start with 5 and end with 5 rows. And I have one that starts with 10 and ends with 10. And when you have a panel with 10 rows that starts with and ends with 10 rows, you have a panel that starts and ends with 5 rows. The one with 5 rows should have 1 extra hole in it. Just keep that in mind. So I am using Lion Brand Tweed Stripes, which is a number 5 bulky weight yarn. And the colorway is called Athena. It's a purple color. It doesn't have a whole lot of stripe to it. It's just a kind of a tonal thing. I am in plain knitting mode, which does flat panels. And I'm going to start by casting on with the first white needle, all the way across to the last white needle. I'm going to make sure that yarn drops below the last red tab next to the white needle. I'm going to bring my yarn into the yarn guide, clear my row counter. Now my row counter doesn't always work so well on this machine, so I just kind of mentally count. But I'm going to go ahead and knit 9 rows, and on the 10th row, every 10th row, we make a hole on purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and knit 9 rows, and then we'll make a hole on the 10th. Alright, that's 9. My row counter says 10, but it's messed up, so this is 9 rows. Since we have 22 stitches here in total, and 3 of those stitches are not used when you make a flat panel, you only actually have 19 working needles right now with a flat panel. So you can't get the hole precisely centered because you have to make the hole with 2 stitches. So I usually use a needle 13 and 14 to work the hole on. So here's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So these are the 2 stitches I'm going to be making the hole with. So I'm going to knit until that 13th needle pops up a little bit. I'm going to grab my loom pick, and I'm going to pick that 13th stitch off the needle. And I'm going to back the machine up just a bit and work that stitch over the 12th needle. And then go ahead and keep knitting. But you always have to make sure that you're gentle when you're forcing both of those stitches back down the white needle. And then as the 14th needle comes up, we're going to go ahead and pick that stitch off as well. And then we have 2 needles here that are empty. We took the 13th stitch and put it on the 12th needle. We're going to take the 14th stitch and put it on the 15th needle, which is right here on my loom pick. That's going on the 15th needle. But we have 2 stitches here that are left with nothing on them. So we need to bring, it doesn't matter which one, but we need to bring the working yarn behind one of those needles as if we were casting on. We need one of the needles to have the yarn going behind it and the other needle have the yarn going in front, so that we don't end up with a big run or a big drop stitch in our fabric, because you won't actually be able to knit any stitches on those needles if you don't have the yarn going behind one of them and in front of the other. So now I'm going to let the 15th needle come up, and I'm going to work that 14th stitch over that 15th needle. And this is why it's important not to knit too tightly, because if it's too tight, you're going to have a really hard time stretching those stitches over the needles next to them. So I'm going to very gently bring that 15th needle up and gently force, if you will, those two stitches down to the base of that needle so the needle can come up. And then we're just going to knit across the rest of the 10th row. So that was our 10th row. We have stitches on this side, 2 stitches that we decreased and recast on, and then the rest of the stitches of the row. So and I'm going to knit 9 more rows and then make another hole the same way on the 10th row. So there's my 9th row. And now we're going to work until, on the 10th row, we're going to work until that 13th needle pops up, like that. Maybe a little further so we can get at it. And then I'm just going to go ahead and pick that off with the loom pick. And because the needle on this side of the stitch where we're going to be placing the stitch from this needle is up already and it's too far to stretch it, we're going to back it up a little bit. And then work that stitch over the needle. Alright, now I'm going to turn the machine a little bit and let that pair of stitches on that one needle go down to the base of the needle. Then as the 14th needle comes up, I'm going to go ahead and take that one off, and then when the 15th comes up, I'm going to place this over the tip of the needle and bring it down. And I want to make sure that I bring my working yarn behind one of those 2 empty needles. And then I'm just going to gently turn the machine and let the white needle, the 15th white needle, come up while I push those stitches down to the base of the needle. Alright, so that's the 10th row. Now you're going to keep repeating those 10 rows until your cable is the length that you want it to be, the finished length, plus a little extra because it is going to shrink when we cable it. And then we will pick up stitches to bind off. Alright, so I have knit the entire length of my panel with all the holes in it. This is my panel that starts and ends with 10 rows, and this has 19 holes all the way down. And then to go with that, I have the panel that starts and ends with 5 rows with 20 holes in it. Now I've already got to, this is the 19th hole right here, and I've worked the 10 rows after that. And now I'm just going to go ahead and pick up all the stitches off of the machine with the tail of the yarn. So here's the panel that starts and ends with 10 rows. I'm going to give it a lengthwise stretch all the way down to work all those stitches into place. I'm going to tug on the cast on tail just to bring the end closer together so it's not so ruffly. And then what we're going to do to create this cable is I have, this one starts and ends with 10 rows, and this one starts and ends with 5. So what I'm going to do here to make a cable out of this is I'm going to take the one that starts with 10 rows, shove it down through the first hole in the one with 5, And then we're eventually going to join the ends together like that. What we're going to do now is find the next hole in the strip that's on top and then pull the strip underneath through that hole all the way through. Like so. And then you want to feel in the back, make sure you're not missing any holes. You're going to get the next hole in the one on top again and pull the one that's underneath all the way through and out. And you're just going to keep repeating this over and over and over again. Finding the next hole on the top panel and bringing the underneath panel up through it. And this gives a kind of mock cable look. And you can actually sew these cables together in between flat panels to make like a cabled insert, or sew the cables together side by side to make a solid cabled knitted fabric. And this is actually pretty squishy, pretty bulky. And that is why it makes such a good scarf. So I'm just going to continue all the way to the end, pulling the underneath panel through the next hole in the one on top. So now I've got to the end of threading my panels through each other. I'm going to thread the last one on the front, which is the one with 10, and then I'm going to bring the end of that through the last with the 5 rows above the hole. And then to finish up the cable, we're going to join those 2 layers together at the ends. And that is our finished cable. And you could join them together going opposite directions. You could join them together going the same direction, which is what I'm going to do. And these actually look more cable-like once they're sewn together, because when you sew them, that brings the center in further. And so you get more of a line in between the 2 cables. And on the back, it actually doesn't look that bad for the wrong side of something. But I'm going to go ahead and make my other cable, and then we're going to sew them together and finish the ends. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and sew my cables together. I have some of my leftover yarn on a yarn needle here, and I have the 2 cables with the cast on edges right here, and you want to make sure that they're aligned. So each pair of puffed cable sections needs to be aligned. And we're kind of going to mattress stitch this, but since the actual stitch columns are going like this, you can't really mattress stitch straight. So we're just kind of not really mattress stitching, but using the same concept to stitch these 2 together. So I'm going to start on one side, and I'm going to come down and back up. And I'm going to do the same on this side. And I'm actually going through both layers at the bottom right here. So I'm going to go ahead and take another stitch in the bottom here. And we're not actually working in between stitch columns, we're just going down and then coming back up in the fabric. It doesn't really matter if you're in a stitch column or not, because most of the time you can't be, because the stitch columns are going on a diagonal. And then when you pull on that tail, then those 2 pieces of fabric just kind of nest together. So as you're going along, you may want to adjust the puffiness of each cable pair But I'm going to go ahead and start stitching into the next one. And that is basically how we're stitching this together. We're kind of mattress stitching both cable pairs to each other, and usually about 2 stitches per cable puff, if you want to call it that, is about right. So I'm going to keep stitching like this until I get to the other end of my scarf, and then I'm going to show you how to finish the ends. Alright, now my scarf has been seamed all the way to the other end, and what I'm going to do here is take my yarn needle and I'm going to make a knot in my seaming yarn, and I'm going to cut that tail, leaving about 6 to 8 inches, and then I'm also going to tie off the seaming yarn at the other end, and I'm also going to cut that, leaving a 6 to 8 inch tail. And now what we're going to do to finish off the ends is we're going to single crochet through all these live stitches, and we're going to be crocheting these 2 layers together like that. So I have some of the leftover yarn from the knitting, and what I'm going to do here is stretch out the edge of each one so that I can see every stitch on the bind off yarn, because I'm going to do the bind off first. And I have a size J crochet hook. This is 6 millimeters. And what we're doing here is, as you can see, this front tube has the edges folded in because that's the way they naturally curl. And the back the back panel is going to do the same thing. Like that. And we have a total of 19 stitches on each panel. So we're going to have the 5th stitch in from the edge, the outside edge. That's going to be our fold line on the outside. And then we have 4 stitches here, which are going to be crocheted through with the 4 stitches here. Then we'll have 1 in the middle that has nothing else on it. And then we'll have 4 over here that are crocheted with the back 4 on this side, and 1 more on the folded edge. But we're going to be doing this to both panels at the same time and crocheting them together like that, so that they're all one piece, all one thickness. So first what I'm going to do is make sure that I found the 5th stitch in from the edge on the front panel and on the back panel. I'm going to insert my hook into the one on the front panel and into my 5th stitch on the back panel. And what you want to make sure that you're doing, we're going to single crochet through the live stitches. You want to make sure that you're not splitting the yarn that is holding these live stitches, because we're going to pull it out when we're done with the crocheting. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my crocheting yarn. I'm going to pull up a loop and I'm going to chain 1, because that's my first stitch. And then we're going to be crocheting, for the most part here, we're going to be crocheting through 4 layers at once. So I'm going to go ahead and find, I just crocheted through 1 loop, I'm going to find the next live stitch on the front, and then as we have the back half of the front panel folded in behind it, I'm going to find the next one on the back of that front panel, making sure I'm not getting waste yarn with it. Then I'm going to get the next one that is on the back panel on the front, the next one that is on the back panel on the back, folded behind. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my working yarn and single crochet through all those layers. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to find the next live stitch to the left on the front of the front panel, And then I'm going to find the piece of that front panel that's folded to the back, and I'm going to get the next live stitch on the back part of that front panel, making sure not to twist it. I'm going to get the next live stitch on the front of the back panel, and the next live stitch on the back of the back panel. And then I'm going to single crochet through all 4 layers. And I'm going to do this 2 more times until the back part of each panel has had all the stitches used up on it. And then we're going to work a single stitch in the middle that's only through the front of the front panel and the front of the back panel. Now that I've got to the last stitch of the back of the front panel, I'm just stretching out that front panel edge to give some slack in the yarn that's holding those live stitches. Because when we're finished, we're going to pull out that yarn, and the edge where that yarn starts is on the inside here. So I need to make sure that I have a big loop here that I can keep out of the way, that will still give me something to pull on when I need to remove that yarn. So now I'm just going to work a single stitch in the middle of the panels here. This is the center stitch of the front panel, and then since we used up the rest of the stitches on the back folded part of the front panel and the back folded part of the back panel, we're going to take just the center stitch from the back panel, the front of the back panel. And this loop of yarn that's going to give me something to pull on my cast on yarn with, or my bind off yarn that's holding those stitches, I'm going to move that loop out of the way so that I can still pull on it later, but it doesn't get all worked into the crocheting. So I'm just going to crochet through those 2 stitches right there, and then I'm going to go back to doing what I was doing before. I'm going to get the next stitch on the front of the front panel, and then I'm going to we're going to go back to picking up the stitches on these back folded parts of the panels. So I'm going to get the edge stitch on the back of the front panel, then I'm going to get the next stitch on the front of the back panel, and the edge stitch back here on the back of the back panel. And I just want to make sure that I also pull on the waste yarn here, or the bind off yarn here, and give a loop so that I've got something to pull on. And I'm just going to grab that edge stitch on the back. Keeping that loop out of the way, I'm going to single crochet through all 4 of those layers. So now I'm going to get the next live stitch on the front of the front panel, the next live stitch on the back of the front panel, that back folded piece. I'm going to get the next live stitch on the front of the back panel, and the next live stitch on the back of the back panel, the back folded section. Single crochet through all of those, and I'm going to do that, keep repeating that step until I get through all the rest of the stitches for this cable. Now there's only 1 stitch left on the front and 1 stitch left on the back, so I'm just going to crochet through those 2 stitches. I'm just going to pull on those loops of yarn, the big loops that we left, to remove the yarn that was holding those stitches. And then we're going to weave in those tails in a minute. And I'm just going to stretch out my crochet loop here, because as you can see, the seam that is holding the cables together at this edge is too far in. and so then it's not actually on the edge. So I'm going to pick out the knot in my seaming yarn, and I'm going to unravel that seam for just about an inch, right there. And I'm just going to take the yarn with my yarn needle, and I'm going to seam this back together in the right place. And I want to make sure that this edge is also stitched in the right place. And then I'm just going to tie a knot in the end of the yarn. So now I'm going to repeat the crocheting that I did on this panel, and I'm going to do it again to this panel to close up this end. Alright, now I have finished crocheting across the entire end of the scarf. I've got all these tails sticking out. I have pulled out all of the strands of yarn that were holding the live stitches before I crocheted them together. I have a crochet tail, a seaming tail, and I'm going to have another tail in just a minute, because now I'm going to cut off that as well and pull the end of it through the loop to tie it off. And now I have to weave in all of these tails of yarn. So I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to grab one of these bind off tails that was holding the live stitches, and I'm just going to go ahead and work the tail through, not underneath, but I'm splitting it through these back cables, because on the front you won't be able to see that. These are tucked behind all the ones on the front. So I'm just going to be kind of burying the tails, encasing them inside all of these cables on the back. So now I'm just going to do the same thing with the rest of these tails and bury them into the back of the cables fabric, and then I'm going to show you how to close up the other end. So now I'm finished with this end of the scarf, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to finish the other end. Now this end is actually where we cast on. So we're going to have to treat this a little bit differently because the cables are going the opposite way. If you look at this end, from this end the cables are going down, and on this end they're going up. So with this cast on end, we're going to have to treat it slightly differently. We're basically crocheting them together in the same way, but we have to rearrange the layers a little bit. So I'm going to turn it over here, and as you can see with this end, the layers are folded. They're naturally folding in a different way than they did on this end. So what we're going to do here is, if you look at it, you have one layer on the inside that is one panel that's curled up on both sides to folds to the back, just like on the other side. And then your outside panel, you've got it on the front, and then you've got your back parts that fold in that end up folding around the ones from the other panel. So we're kind of making a little sandwich like that, where this outside panel is going all the way around the outside and the other panel is on the inside. We still have the 4 stitches on each side folded to the inside on both panels, and we're still going to be crocheting through all 4 layers. So as we did before, you want to make sure that you stretch out the edges of both your panels to make sure there's enough slack in that yarn that's holding those stitches. And then we're going to get our crochet yarn, and as we did before, we're going to start on the folded edge. So I'm going to go to the 5th stitch in and insert my hook into that one, and then the 5th stitch in from this inside panel. And then I'm going to pull my crochet yarn through both of those needles chain 1, and then we're going to start going through all these layers. So I'm going to take the next loop on this outside panel and go through it, making sure I don't get any of that cast on yarn. The next one from this back folded part of the inside panel, then the next one from the front of the inside panel, and the next one from the front of the outside panel. And then I'm going to single crochet through all of those layers. I'm going to get the next stitch on this back folded part of the outside panel, the next stitch on the back folded part of the inside panel, the next stitch on the front of the inside panel, and the next stitch on the front of the outside panel. And single crochet through all 4 layers. So I'm just going to keep crocheting this end of the scarf together. I'm going to make sure before I get to the end of each of these back folded panels that I pull on the cast on yarn to make a big extra loop of that yarn that I can pull out easily later. And just as we did before, we're going to crochet to the end of the back panels, the back parts of the panels that are folded in. Then there's 1 stitch in the middle that is just the 2 front panels. And then we're going to crochet the last 4 stitches of these back folded panels to the front panels, and then there should be 1 edge stitch on the folded edge from the inside panel and from the outside panel. This is basically the same thing we did at the other end, but we just have to rearrange the folded layers a little differently because of the twist of the cables. Alright, now I've got all of my stitches crocheted together, and I'm going to weave in the rest of my tails, and then you're finished with your scarf. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you make this scarf, let me know how it turned out for you in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe, making sure that you click the little bell next to the subscribe button to be notified of new videos. Thanks for watching. Bye!